Hello. Thank you for inviting me to speak at this meeting devoted to a very important topic on diversity, inclusion, and team science. My name is Bala Chaudhary, and I'm coming to you today from the traditional lands of the Ojibwe, the Potawatomi, the Musqueam people, and also we're roughly 75,000 Native Americans from 150 different tribes currently reside in what we now call Chicago. Today I'll be sharing some ideas on what we as research scientists, as leaders, or primary investigators can do to work towards anti-racism in our lab groups. Over the past several months, as scientists have been increasingly in search of anti-racism action plans, there was a real need for some clear steps that PIs could undertake to build a more racially inclusive lab environment. And so first off, I want to really acknowledge my co-author, Dr. Esmeret Asefa Berhe, who is a professor and soil biogeochemist at UC Merced and a real leader in STEM equity. Together we wrote a paper called 10 Simple Rules for Building an Anti-Racist Lab, which is now published in PLOS Computational Biology as part of their 10 Simple Rules series. Of course, there are more than 10 steps to this work, and not all will be simple, but we hope our piece can help scientists tackle this issue in a digestible format. We've been really overwhelmed by the huge amount of interest and response to the paper just a couple months after it being published. It's got over 20,000 downloads. And in the interest of time today, I won't go through all of the 10 rules in this presentation. You can check out the paper online, but I'll primarily describe the motivation for the work, particularly as it pertains to the environmental sciences, and highlight some of the most pressing rules. But before we start talking about anti-racism in STEM labs, I want to point out that I'm not a STEM equity scholar. I'm a scientist. It's common that minoritized scientists are asked to speak on their diversity work and not necessarily their science, so I wanted to take a moment to highlight some of the work going on in my lab. So research in my lab focuses on plant, soil, microbial ecology, and my area of expertise is specifically mycorrhizal fungi. We use a variety of different approaches. We use large-scale field experiments to study how plant symbiotic communities assemble, how they're spatially distributed across landscapes. We use traits of the fungi to try to predict dispersal capabilities of different species or groups of species. And then finally, we employ a lot of data synthesis methods to make broader inferences about plant symbiotic function, dispersal, and other life history strategies of mycorrhizal fungi. We also conduct neon-enabled science in my lab, and this past year we initiated an experiment to study how mycorrhizal fungi disperse at landscape and potentially continent scales. So most plants associate with the type of mycorrhizal fungi that don't form mushrooms, so no above ground structures and comparatively large spores. And it's been kind of a conundrum that these fungal species are seemingly dispersal limited, but still exhibit pretty cosmopolitan global distributions. And so one component of my career award is to utilize neon to study continent scale aerial dispersal in mycorrhizal fungi. This summer we initiated a pilot of our project to install dust collectors at all 20 of the core neon terrestrial sites to track mycorrhizal fungal dispersal. So after our team installs the dust collectors at sites as part of the Assignable Assets program, the NEON staff can ship us the samples. This fall we started processing samples. It may seem like they're sending us these empty canisters, but they're full of fungi and the occasional bee, like this picture captured, and then we analyze the dust for spore traits, and we sequence all of the fungi using high throughput sequencing. So our prior work in Chicago suggests that anthropogenic soil disturbance is the main way that these microbes are released into the air to enable their dispersal, and we're excited to examine how generalizable those patterns are using this study. So the integrated educational component of my career award has really enabled what I think is exciting scholarship into the best practices on promoting racial and ethnic equity and inclusion in our field. My work focuses on race and ethnicity, but it's important to recognize the many dimensions of diversity: gender, class, sexual orientation, as well. And I've been taking a deep dive into race, particularly because it's important to me as a woman of color, but mainly because since becoming a faculty member, there are a lot of students of color who come to me and confide in me about their experiences in our field, and confide in a lot of negative experiences in our field. They're often troubled by the lack of representation of people of color in their curriculum, in the classrooms, and in the broader image of what an environmental scientist looks like. And this is all despite a really high degree of interest of students of color in environmental sciences, a high degree of preparedness among students, as well as a strong legacy of communities of color that have really led global environmental movements. And so why is there this disconnect? So in 2016, I teamed up with a social scientist colleague, Dr. Tanya Schussler, to conduct research on the experiences of students of color in our field to understand their motivations for choosing the major, to get into our discipline, to try to identify supports or impediments they may face in our departments, and learn what changes the students themselves would recommend to make our programs more inclusive. So we conducted focus groups at 2 universities led by students, and analyzed this qualitative data for common themes. And this is a student-driven program, so I really want to recognize all of these students that were involved in the work and help make it happen. Now, as faculty, we were really floored by the responses, many very moving and telling quotes that are summarized in a paper that's in review now. We posted a preprint of this paper. It's online at the bottom of the slide if you want to check it out. But in short, the interviews revealed that students of color had unique motivations for getting into the field that really reflected their desire to achieve social and ecological well-being in their communities. So one student said, "It's so different what brought us to environmental science. Everyone else grew up rock climbing or going to Yellowstone, but I'm in this field because we're literally dying." Another student said, "The lack of diversity doesn't allow for these conversations to be had. People will talk about the polar bears dying before they talk about brown people breathing in dangerous air." The interviews also revealed experiences that reflect quote-unquote white environmentalism, and really led students to feel excluded and isolated. So one student wrote, "I definitely see a lot of white savior complex in other students. People are like, if I get my degree, I want to go help out this nation or that nation, even though that's really unrealistic." Another student wrote, "I didn't feel I had a place. I was always the one pointing out stuff in classes that's racist, and the professors just didn't know how to maneuver it." So as faculty, we've been working steadily to improve racial equity and inclusion in our programs, but the May 2020 events really called new attention for the need for a broader approach to anti-racism and STEM. The racist murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor sparked a global uprising against systemic racism and police brutality against Black people. Racism faced by Christian Cooper while birding in Central Park demonstrated the danger that scientists face in natural spaces. Days later, Black academics began sharing on social media thousands of harrowing stories accounting the racism they face in academic institutions using the hashtag Black in the Ivory. And on June 10th, Black scientists initiated a global strike to shut down STEM and encouraged colleagues to spend the day reading about anti-racism, reflecting on its pervasiveness, and developing anti-racism plans of action. So unfortunately, as a scientist of color who actively works to develop anti-racist systems in STEM, I and my co-author Asmerit, we've both experienced firsthand the harmful mistakes that scientists sometimes make as beginners to discussions of race. So they include questioning the instrumental value of Black, Indigenous, and people of color in STEM, which can be objectifying. People of color don't need to serve a function. We simply deserve to be in science spaces. Confusing race as a biological entity, arguing that since there's no genetic determinant of race, that there is no racism. Arguing that the unbiased nature of science and scientists precludes racial biases in STEM. That's just not true. See lots of data on racial bias in funding, hiring, name discrimination, etc. And then finally, hijacking discussions of race with anecdotes from other types of discrimination without employing an intersectional framework. So for example, the sexism or classism that you face is not the same or equal to racist encounters, and nor are the solutions. So these mistakes are not only counterproductive, they've been shown to cause anxiety and burnout for people of color working toward racial and ethnic equity. Another common mistake is taking a quote-unquote not racist approach as opposed to an anti-racist approach. So anti-racism encourages beliefs, actions, or policies that promote the idea that people of different races and ethnicities are equal. And the scholar Ibram Kendi writes, one either allows racial inequities to persevere as a racist or confronts racial inequities as an anti-racist. There is no safe in-between space of not racist. So anti-racism in the lab goes beyond being kind. It goes beyond treating everybody equally or taking a colorblind approach. Being anti-racist means developing and supporting anti-racist policies through intentional introspection and subsequent action. So if those are the don'ts, what are the do's? So rule 1 is to talk about it. Lab PIs are responsible for setting lab agendas and culture, and this will happen whether it's intentional or not. So talking about race signals that the lab is a space where members can feel comfortable talking about race and also feel comfortable reporting racism. And discussions can be structured around journal club readings of peer-reviewed literature on STEM equity. They can be around diversity, equity, and inclusion speakers or brainstorming sessions to develop policies. We've gotten a lot of positive feedback from scientists around the world who've used our paper to hold first discussions in their labs. We provide a glossary, and so lab members can spend time talking about terms, learning, defining things like what is a microaggression, what is tone policing, what is tokenism. But really the first step is creating a space to talk about racism in science. Rule 2 calls for addressing racism in your lab and field safety guidelines. And it's probably the most urgent rule because racist violence threatens the safety of our lab members. Black and brown people are particularly targeted, and they may be harassed by campus security or others who think they don't belong. This can be very dangerous for Black and brown students or staff who especially need to access science spaces like labs or greenhouses after hours. So providing additional supports can help Black, Indigenous, and people of color trainees to ensure their safety in these science spaces. So this can mean brightly colored vests, obvious badges, the buddy system. It's really sad, just in the last couple months, I've gotten messages from early career researchers who are questioning whether to apply for certain jobs because they're located in places where these trainees fear for their safety. So it's really the PI's responsibility to provide these safety nets and additional supports to ensure Black and brown safety in science spaces. And I want to point out a really excellent topic that came, an excellent resource that came out this year. It's a paper written by Demery and Pipkin outlining safe fieldwork strategies for at-risk individuals. And it's full of ideas that PIs can incorporate into their fieldwork safety guidelines. So there are a lot of really excellent resources out there now. Rule 3 calls for publishing papers and writing grants with colleagues who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color. Publications and grants are the metrics of success and longevity in academic science, period. And more our work is collaborative, but these networks that we're a part of, they can be really insular. And so part of anti-racist work is engaging in that serious introspection about the racial diversity of our publication networks and working to diversify who we write papers with and who we write grants with. Rule 4 deals with mentoring and examining your lab's mentoring practices. So more and more, the one-on-one hierarchical mentor model is being abandoned for multi-mentor systems. So multi-mentor systems come in many different flavors. There's a lot of really great scholarship going on right now on different approaches to mentoring that are evidence-based. And so multi-mentor models come in lots of different flavors. They can include group-based mentoring, network mentoring, nested mentoring, and these support systems help buffer against mentor-mentee relationships that might fail due to racial biases, and they could be conscious or unconscious. And more likely, these types of mentor relationships meet the unique and varied needs of the mentee. On the right side of the slide is a really cool thing called the Mentor Map, developed by Carrie Ann Rackmore's National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity, which is a system to identify dozens of mentors that meet different needs, like access to opportunities, role models, feedback, safe spaces, and these are evolving documents that can be used by our mentees for their entire careers. Rule 9 has to deal with STEM leadership. I'm ending with this one because it's very important. Too often, Black, Indigenous, and people of color are encouraged to participate in the scientific endeavor in purely supportive or subjugative roles. So, for example, minoritized students might be recruited as short-term research support, sometimes paid, not always, in a manner that leads to no publications. We need to promote racial diversity in status elevating roles. So leadership positions in labs and institutions, leadership positions in professional societies, editorial boards, and funding agencies. A really excellent paper that came out this year by Christopher Schell and colleagues outlines recommendations for promoting Black excellence in ecology in a way that elevates Black scholars as institutional and societal leaders. Another excellent resource to check out. And I'll just end with 3 take-home messages for what's hopefully a journey of anti-racist introspection and action. First, despite the title of this talk, building an anti-racist lab won't always be easy, but simple steps do exist for groups that want to take action. Second, PIs, lab heads are uniquely positioned to step up and be leaders in this area of developing anti-racist STEM action. And third, this work in our labs can begin today. We don't have to form additional committees or surveys in order to make progress. So thank you very much, and I'll just end there, but I would also very much like to thank my lab, my collaborators, and my funders. And of course, thank you to you for listening.